One of the more disturbing online dating stories that I've gotten, and the person who shared this, her name's Alice, and she said that she just wanted to share this to bring awareness to the fact that you should be careful about who you meet up with, even if you think that they seem normal. Just trust your gut. Her friend Emma was working as an au pair in London, England for a family that was pretty strict. They didn't allow her to spend the night at anyone's house besides one close friend that she had there, and she worked all week, but she was off Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. And on this one Friday, after a few months of working for this family, she meets a guy from an online dating app, and this guy meet up at a local pub. They talk, they drink, they have a good time, and he seemed normal enough. They had some good conversations. And at the end of the night, they ended up kissing, and he invited her back to his house, but she said she couldn't go because she knew the family would be upset with her if she didn't go back home. The family knew she was on a date with this guy, so she didn't want to concern them. So she says, no, the guy keeps pushing. She says, no, I have to go home. A few days after the date, she comes down with this horrible illness. She said she had nausea, fever, chills, lightheadedness. She had never been that sick before. Even normal common colds didn't really typically affect her because she said she was pretty healthy. Illness is not letting up, and so she's back and forth to the doctor. They can't figure out what's wrong with her. Finally, they end up running some tests and find out that she has a bacteria in her system that can only be found in a body after decomposition. The doctor is very concerned naturally, and he starts asking her all kinds of questions like, have you gone to a wake or a funeral lately? Have you been around anyone who's not part of your normal friend group? And she says, only this date that I went on the other day. He gives the name. Apparently authorities were called, and they found out that this guy has a hobby of digging up grave sites and doing you know what with the bodies. She was sick, she was disgusted naturally, and apparently she didn't ever find out what happened to the guy. She wanted nothing to do with him. She didn't even want to know. Ella said that Emma tries not to think about what would have happened to her had she gone back to this guy's house, because we don't know what he was doing, if he was willing to do that. And she ended the message by saying, I know that everybody thinks that something like this can't happen to you, but that's also what Emma thought. I apparently seem perfectly normal and safe, so just trust your gut. Be careful if you go to a stranger's house. You really just can't trust people unless you truly know them, so... I'm sorry that one was a little gruesome, but I think it's an important message at the end. So follow for more spooky scary stories. My brother's neighbor worked for the government and then vanished without a trace. Anytime I post a story like this, I tend to get shadow banned for a little bit, but I don't care. So this came from someone named Marissa. She says this is 100% true. Her brother in 2015 was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she and her boyfriend went out there to visit him, and they were staying at his house, lived in a nice subdivision, and they're out in his yard. They spent a lot of time while they were out there hanging out in his backyard. And the neighbors out there, we'll just call him Mark. And Mark comes over, he's talking to them at the fence, and they're like, oh, you know, who's that? And their brother's like, oh, that's Mark, he's really cool. And Mark ends up saying, do you guys want to come hang out in my hot tub? And Marissa said she didn't get any creepy vibes from him or anything like that. So they're like, yeah, we'll come hang out in your hot tub. So they go over in his yard. They're all hanging out in the hot tub. While they're in the hot tub, they're trying to get to know Mark. And so Marissa and her boyfriend are asking him all kinds of questions, like, what do you do for work? And he mentions he works for the government at a military base in New Mexico. He doesn't say which one, but he does mention that he has high clearance. And so Marissa and her boyfriend start asking him all kinds of questions. They're like, well, what do you think about this theory about things in the sky? Or what do you think about this theory that they're keeping these things at certain bases? And to all of these questions, Mark is just saying, I can't confirm or deny anything. He's being very tight-lipped about anything work related. But eventually he's like, well, why don't I show you guys my house? Do you guys want to come in? Because he's clearly trying to change the subject. They're like, sure, let's see your house. So they walk in and they're blown away because this house is filled with very custom, expensive looking furniture. But after they walk in, they see pointed out of one of the windows is a very expensive looking telescope. He let them look through it. She said it was literally like you could see into space. I've never seen anything like it. Not like you were looking at space, like you were looking into space when you look through this thing. As they're walking through his house, they're complimenting him on his furniture, and he's showing them secret compartments hidden in almost every single piece of furniture he owned. Marissa's brother at one point says, wow, this is a really nice table. And he says, thanks, do you want to buy it? And they all think that's kind of weird because they're like, why would you offer to sell this clearly very expensive piece of furniture to her brother? And her brother ends up saying something like, oh, I don't think I can afford that. And meanwhile, Mark is making it seem like he's not planning on being at this residence long. But even still, Marissa said she wondered at the time, like, why would you not plan on taking all this very expensive custom furniture with you? You were moving, right? He takes them into his bedroom, and in his bed, he pushes a button and out pops a compartment where he has a full assortment of firearms and weapons. Had similar components in his nightstands, his coffee table, and his countertops. She said it just seemed like he was ready for anything. They wrap it up, they head back to her brother's house. She and her boyfriend leave to head back to where they're from. About a week after Marissa and her boyfriend got home, her brother calls her. He's like, you will not believe what just happened. Like, do you remember Mark? She's like, yeah, of course we remember Mark. And he's like, okay, I was just at home. I got a knock on my door. I opened the door. There's a couple men in black suits. They were driving a black Suburban type SUV. They start asking me all about Mark, conversations we had had, if he had revealed any classified information. What he told us his name was. Literally asked her brother to give them a detailed list of every interaction that he had ever had. And he was like, I don't know. And they questioned him for hours. Eventually they left and he never saw Mark again. His house was just there until somebody else moved in. She said it still freaks her brother out. And she doesn't know if they do this every time somebody with high clearance moves. or if they did something with him because they thought that he shared something more than he was supposed to. So Marissa's her real name. I'll send her this link. Let her know if you have thoughts. For more spooky, scary stories. That it's Veterans Day, I wanted to honor a friend by sharing his story. I've told this story before on this channel, but way before I started Spooky Scary Storytime. But I feel like it's one of those stories that sort of defined who I am as a person and what I believe about life and the afterlife, because I believe that it's possible for someone who's on the other side to maybe communicate with you. And maybe this will make somebody out there feel better if you've lost someone. But I really feel like this sort of set the framework for me now eventually doing Spooky Scary Storytime. But years ago I was working as a bartender in Chicago. I was in college and I was a baby bartender, so I didn't know what I was doing. It was an English soccer pub and I was working days because that was the only shift that was available at the time. And every day this old man would come in, and his name was Jim, and he didn't really seem to like me at first, but eventually I won him over. And every day he would come in about 11:15 in the morning and he would order 3 Miller Lights and 2 shots of Jameson. He always tipped like crap, but eventually he was always the only person in the bar, so we kind of became friends. I sort of won him over, and he would do things like go over to the jukebox and play what he called hillbilly shit. Tell me how he watched Spanish television, even though he didn't speak a lick of Spanish, because he liked Latin women. And every day after he left the bar, he would go get lunch at this Mexican restaurant where he would order eggs and bacon, which, you know, I don't know. So eventually I left the bar and we continued hanging out. I had his number. I looked at him as sort of a grandfather figure. Both of my grandfathers, they're veterans too, but they passed away when I was young, so I didn't really ever have this like older male presence in my life. And he looked at me, I think, as like a grandchild. I knew that he was from Kentucky. I knew that he was in Vietnam and he was a truck driver after the war, and then he had settled in Chicago and lived alone in a walk-up apartment, but he didn't really have anybody. And so I think we were both just kind of lonely and enjoyed each other's company. And so we would get lunch some days, we would get drinks some days, and sometimes I would take him back to his apartment so I knew where he lived, although I'd never been in there. Throughout our friendship, he told me some things about his life that he had done that he wasn't proud of. I didn't judge him, but I think he was just telling me as like, you know, a listening board. Like, I think he was just letting some things go that he'd carried for a long time, and I think it was sort of cathartic for him to be able to finally like release them. And he helped me a lot too. I was going through a really bad breakup, and it was nice just to have this figure that could listen to me and tell me that it really wasn't worth all of the attention that I was giving it, and like this man wasn't really anything. But anyway, life got busy. Sometimes he would do funny things, like he would call me and then pretend like he didn't know who he was calling. He'd be like, hello, who is this? Even though he had called me. Sometimes he would text me, he'd be like, hey, you little freak, you want to go get a Bloody Mary? And I was always usually down to meet him. But life got busy. I graduated college, I started traveling more, and I didn't see him as much. I quit the bar. He would still try to meet up whenever I was in town, but it became less and less frequent. There came a point where I hadn't heard from him for a few weeks, even though I had texted him, and he hadn't responded to me. So I ended up calling up to the bar where I worked, and I said, hey, has Jim been in?